Antiques Roadshow tonight. It's back next week, but Fiona Bruce is here now on BBC One, mixing with royalty.
Throughout history, the kings and queens of Britain have collected great works of art. For pleasure, for show, for prestige. But Queen Victoria and Prince Albert created a collection unlike any other. Intimate and deeply personal. A collection that reflects their life together and their love for each other. And palaces in which they could live out a grand version of domestic bliss. They filled them with tokens of their love. And love for their children, even their animals. And reflecting all the splendor of royal life. Together they built a collection bursting with the traditional, the regal, and the unexpected. A new exhibition at the Queen's Gallery, Buckingham Palace, puts many of Victoria and Albert's gifts to each other on public view for the first time. Some are dazzling, some surprisingly sexy, some distinctly odd.
A lot of the collection helps to indicate the history of that whole period. And that's why I think an art collection is so fascinating, because it helps to freeze moments in time.
From its romantic beginning to its tragic end, the love between Queen Victoria and Prince Albert is one of history's great royal love stories. Victoria may have been small and rather plain, but she had a passionate nature. She was strong-willed, and when she'd set her heart on something, she had to have it. And she'd set her heart on Albert, her first cousin, whom she met when she was just 17. "He is so excessively handsome," she said. "Such beautiful eyes, an exquisite nose, such a pretty mouth, such a beautiful figure." On the 10th of February 1840, they were married in the Chapel Royal. "It was," said Victoria, "the happiest, brightest moment in my life." They were both just 20. The Archbishop of Canterbury suggested that the Queen might like to delete the word obey from her part of the marriage vows. She was Queen, after all. "No," said Victoria, "I'd like that to be kept." It was a marriage based on powerful physical attraction. Shortly after the wedding night, a breathless Victoria wrote in her journal, "My dearest Albert put on my stockings for me. I went in and saw him shave, a great delight for me." They chose the renowned painter Franz Winterhalter to immortalize their romance. He did more than any other artist to create their image for the British public and the world. Winterhalter knew how to turn a rather dumpy young woman into a glamorous royal presence. and a slightly nervous young prince into a virile master of his domain.
Well, they adored Winterhalter. Well, of course, anybody would. He was a kind of combination of Mario Testino and Cecil Beaton. He waved a wand of magic over them. German painter, height of romanticism, goes to the 19th century, transformed royalty as though they'd floated down on a cloud covered with diamonds. Like a Vogue photographer. You know, managed all the highlights, any wrinkle went away, the dress and everything looked incredible.
We're just going to lift this slightly, and we're going to just place it out of the way to the back.
Perhaps the most striking portrait at the exhibition is one that has rarely been seen in public. The painting hung for many years in Albert's bedroom, for his eyes only.
She called it the secret painting, you know, of her with her hair loose. That was quite dashing.
Well, it's rather come hither, isn't it?
Well, I think it was, but it was done entirely for him.
She has her hair, her tresses unbound, cascading round her shoulders, leaning back, looking extremely voluptuous. Really, as she must have greeted him when he crossed from his bedroom to hers, frankly. I mean, it's a very, very, very sexy portrait.
As children followed, Winterhalter was always on hand to weave a royal fairy tale. The young Victoria and her baby as a 19th century Madonna and child. Or a royal household that echoed the Holy Family. The old Duke of Wellington offers a gift to the baby prince, one of the three kings at the Nativity.
Prince Arthur then wrote to Queen Victoria some years later in his 20s saying, "Where is the present the Duke of Wellington gave me in that painting?" And Queen Victoria had to write back and say, "I'm terribly sorry, but actually there wasn't one. It was all made up."
So he just made up for the
So
painting?
he's furious because
So
he thought it had been kept from him
So there he was being presented as a
by
baby.
his godfather. You see.
And then there was nothing inside.
You know, when it was all designed to make it look, you know.
For both of them, a happy home must have come as something of a relief. For all their rich and privileged backgrounds, both had suffered a childhood that had nearly broken them. Victoria was born in Kensington Palace in London. It was her home until she became queen. As a child, Victoria's character was forcefully, even brutally formed here. In June 1819, the future Queen Victoria was christened in this room. For the first 18 years of her life, she was a pawn in an elaborate game of royal chess. Sometimes it was nasty, sometimes it was farcical. Victoria was the only legitimate heir to the throne, but she was still just a girl. Her father died the year after she was born. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, devised a rigid system of upbringing designed to break her daughter's spirit. She even had a name for it, the Kensington system. It was the most unnatural and abnormal childhood you can imagine. It involved treating Victoria like a cross between a naughty infant and a china doll. She wasn't allowed her own room. She shared this one with her mother, even past her 18th birthday. She wasn't allowed to walk downstairs without someone holding her hand. She might injure herself. She was never allowed to be alone. She might come to harm. Or worse, she might start thinking for herself. Then the moment came when Victoria learned she was now queen. She seized her chance and for the first time excluded her mother from the room. The Kensington system was not only monstrous, it also backfired. It was supposed to break her will. Actually, it strengthened it. And it helps to explain why a happy domestic life with a husband and children became so important to her. She wouldn't have to wait long. She met her future husband at her 17th birthday party. Albert was her first cousin and the same age as Victoria. He'd been brought up not in Britain, but in Germany. Albert came from Coburg, a tiny medieval town that had barely changed since the Middle Ages. At the time, it was just one of dozens of tiny dukedoms and principalities that made up Greater Germany. Albert's father, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, was neither rich nor powerful, but he was a master at playing the royal marriage market. Albert always said that he'd known from the age of 3 that if all went according to plan, he'd marry the future Queen of England, Victoria. Albert grew up in the castle of Rosenau, just outside Coburg. It looks cosy enough. Half castle, half gingerbread house. Albert's father had turned the family home into a Gothic fantasy. It's a miniature romantic version of a medieval fortress. It looks much the same now as it did in Albert's time. But Rosenau wasn't a very happy place. Albert's father had affairs. Albert's mother, whom he adored, felt neglected and miserable. The young prince was a solemn and studious sort of chap who took life very seriously from an early age. He and his brother shared these attic rooms with their tutor. This is what he wrote in his diary on the 26th of January, 1825. In the lesson we recited, and I cried because I could not say my repetition, for I had not paid attention. And he was just 6. And then, a month later, I cried at my lesson today because I could not find a verb. The tutor pinched me to show me what a verb was, and I cried about it. There was plenty to cry about. A year earlier, his mother had been banished for having a lover. Albert never saw her again.
Albert's childhood was quite a disastrous one. It was traumatic, and he told his oldest daughter, Victoria, he was very close to this daughter, that sometimes he really had wished himself away, and that he more or less felt suicidal as a child. So yes, it was a bit of a crybaby, but it's very understandable because he had been through traumatic experience and nobody wanted to talk with him about this.
Though the childhoods of Albert and Victoria were not identical, they were amazingly similar. Both suffered emotionally from selfish parents. Both were disgusted by the behaviour of their parents' generation, adulterous, chaotic, irresponsible. And as adults, they both reacted strongly against this picture of married life.
Built a seaside palace for their growing family. Osborne House was in his favourite Italian Renaissance style, with every possible ornament. Bell towers, courtyards, fountains.
They always wanted where they lived to be what they called gemütlich, German for cosy. Okay, it's a pretty grand type of cosy, but more than anywhere else, this place gives you a real sense of how they wanted to live.
Unusually for the time, they decorated their rooms with bright colours, with painted columns and cornices in the Italian style. This is where they began to surround themselves with the art they gave each other.
One thing that strikes me at Osborne is that Victoria surrounded herself with very sensual, even sexy, statues, paintings with lots of flesh on show and perfect bosoms. And given that Albert was looking at all these images as well, any woman would have to be pretty confident about her own physical attractions, not to feel at least a bit threatened by it.
There really is a spectacular amount of naked flesh on show at Osborne. It firmly dispatches any notion that Victoria was, well, a prude. Victoria gave this fantastic display of voluptuous flesh to Albert and had it placed opposite their desks where they could gaze on it for hours. She described it as a most lovely picture containing a group of beautiful women. Aren't they just? But you can't help noticing a similarity to one of Winterhalter's other pictures. There was, in fact, a scandalous rumour at the time that Empress Eugenie and her ladies-in-waiting must have been the models for the naked figures in Albert's picture.
But I suppose if it was art, it was all right. If it was painted, do you know what I mean? It was one way, presumably, of having something like that. But it was always with a classical theme, wasn't it? So that, I think, helped to centre it a bit, rather than just the sort of titillation element, it seemed to me.
There's more flesh on display up in Albert's bathroom.
It's a picture of Hercules surrendering his power to his mistress, the slave Omphale. And there's a nice touch of role reversal here, because look, he's holding her distaff, which was used for spinning and is an ancient symbol of womanhood, and she is wearing his lion's costume. So this painting is asking, who's in charge here? Who's wearing the trousers?
But among the nudes and heavy symbolism, romance was never far away.
Look at this. It's a Minton porcelain dressing set that Albert gave Victoria as a Christmas present in 1853. There's all the little pots for Victoria's potions and powder puffs, and each one has VR on it for Victoria Regina. And then the crowning glory, literally with the crown, is this fabulously and preposterously over-the-top mirror here. But there's something fantastically romantic about it as well, because as Victoria sat and looked at herself in the mirror, she'd be surrounded by Albert's angels looking on adoringly. And then as the final romantic touch, this little couple down here, stealing a kiss.
Osborne is Albert's creation. Increasingly, his taste in architecture and in art would come to dominate. How anxiously nervous I always felt, Victoria wrote, knowing what taste he had, what a judge of art he was, and how great was my joy if any picture I had bought gave him real pleasure.
I think Queen Victoria felt that she came nowhere near Prince Albert in terms of his knowledge and taste and everything else. She kept saying it, my taste is so bad compared to his. But I suppose you could say that Prince Albert's taste was more intellectual, and hers was more about wanting to have records of people and events and family and goodness knows what else. But she had a marvellous eye, obviously.
Victoria herself drew her children again and again.
Into this album, she placed an enormous number of sketches of her children, starting, of course, with Vicky, the eldest child.
Oh, look, she's being fed with a bottle here.
Being fed
by
with the nurse.
The nurse,
Yes, with a bottle. And then we see her sitting up.
Yeah, the thing that intrigues me about this, see this sketch here of the sort of gorgeous, plump little arm, is Victoria's written in her diary around this time, and how she doesn't think little babies are attractive, particularly when they're so small and they look like little frogs, she says. But here she looks like she's kind of revelling in the plumptiousness and the squidginess of little babies.
I think that what she really hated about children was childbirth, which
she
cannot have been fun.
She was not happy when she was pregnant at the beginning, was she? She was
No.
very cross that she'd fallen pregnant so quickly. And she's got some talent, Victoria, as well, when it comes to... Look at that.
Yes. I think what is unique about her is that she was head of state. She was doing all these amazing things, and she was also still finding time to do these sketches.
Absolutely charming. What else have we got here? Oh, look, the little pigtails. That is so lovely. Vicky. And this is fancy dress, one assumes. Look at that.
I think that's such a wonderful way of trying to record moments in somebody's life. I mean, obviously nowadays people take photographs, but I never think they're as interesting, funnily enough, as somebody's personal attempt to try and record however good or bad it is. But of course so many of them had drawing teachers in those days, so they had a real foundation in understanding how to observe, which is half the battle.
Professional artists too were commissioned to paint picture after picture of their family. Paintings of the children even adorn the furniture.
If you look back on it, it's immortalising a totally closed world. It's a totally closed world. Everything to do with them and which they did and what they collected. Within that area, totally closed, and at the heart of it is the family. And just endless pictures of those children, endless pictures of each other, within a kind of closed domestic interior. It gets a bit spooky at times.
Now talk me through this rather gruesome little collection.
These are marble replicas of several of Queen Victoria's infant children at particular stages. When visitors come to Osborne, they often come through here, this room, and say, "Oh no, dead babies." In fact, these children grew up to have perfectly good adult lives. I suppose it's because marble is a material of death, in a way. It's what you use for monuments.
It looks like a collection of severed limbs.
Well, it does, but let me tell you how you made these. You first of all had to take a plaster cast of the particular limb. And I don't know if you've ever tried to take a plaster cast of a 3-month-old or a 3-year-old. It was done while they were asleep, probably here in the nursery at Osborne. And this sort of old bearded man would creep in with a bucket of plaster, make a plaster cast. And of course, that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at a marble carving. And what's happened is the sculptor has idealised, he's ironed out the little tiny imperfections in the plaster. And they are most exquisitely carved objects. In this one, I think this is Princess Louise, and she's holding a little pea between her thumb and forefinger. And I think the sculptor just didn't dare to remove that last bit of marble because he would have knocked off the finger or thumb in the process.
I can see the charm, sort of little pudgy foot. But talk me through the ear. Now, what's that all about?
Now, this is Prince Albert's ear. This was a feature of her husband that Queen Victoria would have wanted the sculptor to get exactly right.
I wonder if she talked into it. Albert, I'm thinking of having another nude done. I'm sure you'll like it. Who knows?
Victoria and Albert were the first royal couple to make Buckingham Palace their London home. It had stood empty for years, neglected and unloved. As at Osborne, they were keen to make it their own.
For a start, they filled it with pictures of the family. Everywhere they lived, they turned the walls into a giant family album.
Buckingham Palace is an official residence. The statues here have rather more clothes on than at Osborne. Victoria gave this statue to Albert shortly after they were married.
For this, Victoria told the sculptor John Gibson to make it like a Greek statue and to make it life-size. Well, Victoria was tiny, of course, and Gibson knew he had to make it look regal. So he's given her a garland in one hand with which to bestow honours, and a scroll in the other to symbolise lawmaking. And this is what he gave her, Albert, in similarly noble mode. This time, he's a Greek warrior. He's customised it, of course. On his armour are the national flowers of his adopted country, showing his commitment to his new country, Britain. And here, on his breastplate, the winged figure of Victory, or Victoria, of course, showing that he is Victoria's defender, her champion. Very romantic.
They transformed what had been a rather run-down, shabby palace into a vibrant, colourful affair. Together, they built a ballroom. They held grand costume balls and danced till the small hours. For a while, Buckingham Palace was known as the headquarters of taste. But despite enjoying the crowded whirl of life in the royal court, Victoria and Albert also craved peace and privacy. They found it about as far away as it's possible to get. The Highlands of Scotland.
Their passion for everything Scottish was part of the reinvention of the Highlands as wild and romantic. All started by the novels of Sir Walter Scott earlier in the century. Kilts, clans, chieftains, wild scenery. All this was once dismissed by the English as primitive. Now it was exotic and exciting.
Their first trip together started a lifelong love affair with the Highlands. For Albert, Scotland's forests and glens were a welcome reminder of his native Germany. What he and Victoria wanted here too was a refuge, a place of their own. The castle they designed was half Highland romance, half German fairy tale.
Some people called it pepper pot and gingerbread. Albert and Victoria called it beautiful.
They hurled themselves into the Highland lifestyle.
Everyone had to wear Highland dress. Porridge and kippers were served for breakfast. And according to one maid of honour, the pipers played loud enough to blow your head off.
Inside, the style was robustly, even overwhelmingly Scottish. From curtains to carpets to wallpaper, it was disparagingly dubbed tartanitis. One of their grandchildren recalled, it had a way of flickering before your eyes and confusing your brain. One artist in particular was their favourite to depict life at Balmoral.
I've always loved the Carl Haag watercolours. A real genius, I think. And he stayed a lot at Balmoral and did all these, I think, wonderful watercolours of the children and scenes of the family going up Loch Nagar, you know, the mountain for picnics or whatever it was.
A very royal kind of picnic, as Victoria, the children and attendants follow on behind, an intrepid Albert leads the way to the top of the mountain. The painting was his present to Victoria. In Victoria's present to Albert, she's come out from the castle to admire the day's hunt. Albert proudly shows off a dead stag. Actually, Albert was a terrible shot, so a bit of poetic license there.
For them, Scotland wasn't only an escape into a kind of simulated Duchy of Coburg dropped in the middle of Scotland. It was an escape. It was an escape to an earlier period. In the south, everything was the world of commerce and the city and business and manufacture. And up in Scotland, there were feudal lords and castles and everybody bowed and scraped. It was a world which had completely gone in the south. There they were up with clansmen and tartans and chiefs of the clan and quite a primitive society. And that I think, appealed to her.
The Royal Workshops in London are where the art and objects of the royal collection are conserved and restored. A pair of candelabra from Balmoral are being spruced up for the coming exhibition.
These are good examples of things that Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had made for their own house. They're great English craftsmanship of the mid-19th century, Minton of Stoke here and Winfield of Birmingham, and in this very striking Highland style, clearly designed for Balmoral. And the figures were designed by Edwin Landseer, the painter, who was often a guest staying at Balmoral.
And how would you describe the style of these?
They're really in the sort of Scottish baronial
Scottish style.
Very grand, certainly, aren't
very
they?
grand, with all motives: stags' heads, the shooting bags, the rifles, the dirks, daggers, hunting horns here, and of course the full Highland dress, and no doubt hunting and hunting dogs depicted as well.
I think it's a great sense of fun, actually, to be able to say, well, we've built a Highland castle, let's make everything, give everything a Highland theme.
Now, in this rather handy picture you've got here, this was painted, when would this be painted?
This was painted in 1857.
And it works as a brilliant reference guide, doesn't it? Because these are here, and you can see exactly what they used to look like.
Absolutely. Here you can see the candelabra in the Queen's drawing room, showing their original decoration of gold and patinated silver.
Right.
And you can see that the hunting horns here were black as well as the stag's heads.
And what made them black?
That was a form of patination. It was artificially oxidising the surface of the silver to give it this rather blue-black finish.
Now, I noticed that as well as the wear and tear here, there's a break round the neck here, so they've had a bit of a few knocks, haven't they, these things?
When they're done, you won't see any of that.
Really?
Absolutely, I
There's
promise.
a telltale bit of glue here that I can see.
The artist who designed the candelabra is better known as the man who sculpted the lions in Trafalgar Square. And animals were what Edwin Landseer did best. And Victoria and Albert loved the heroic, often sentimental way he portrayed them. A stag surveys his kingdom. A sheepdog mourns his dead master. And Albert's favourite greyhound. Victoria commissioned this painting for Albert's birthday, just a year after they were married.
It's a portrait of Albert without the prince, a collection of the things dearest to his heart. His dog Eos guards her master's possessions. His ivory-topped cane, his top hat, leather gloves, and a stool covered in deerskin, a reference to Albert the huntsman. And Landseer borrowed these things without asking, so there was a bit of a flutter in the royal household when Albert wanted to go out, and his top hat and gloves couldn't be found.
Here's Eos again, another birthday present, and their daughter Vicky, aged 2. Landseer's pictures portrayed Victoria and Albert as the very model of a royal couple. At home with the locals, joining in their pursuits. Fond of children. Fond of animals. Alive or dead.
I mean, it was a very sentimental age. I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it depends on the way people are looking at the world at the time. And you could say it was trite or self-righteous or moralizing or something, but I don't think one should necessarily condemn because of that. But it is interesting how sometimes things go through these fashions, don't they? So people remove a lot of things. Oh, well, it's boring and awful or overblown or whatever, only to find 25, 50 years later it's coming back again.
Windsor Castle has been the home of English kings and queens since medieval times. The castle houses more of the royal art collection than any other royal residence.
Growing up in those houses like Windsor, you know, you rush up and down corridors, I don't know, mucking about as small children, never really noticing the surroundings much. And I've never forgotten, suddenly, I think it must have been about the age of 14, I suddenly started to notice the paintings. I can't tell you how wonderful it was, that moment.
Most of the art here is formal and official, staged to make a courtly impression. But for Victoria and Albert, art was also something more homely, a kind of diary in pictures.
Both of them were obsessed with recording everything. Little watercolours of the Christmas decorations, the rooms they went to, every single event. It was absolutely every aspect of their life. I mean, there's absolutely no precedent I know before Victoria and Albert of a sovereign or a royal couple actually setting out to record every significant moment in their lives.
This is one of the albums which have survived from Victoria and Albert's collection. In this case, actually, the theatrical album.
Can we have a look? Let's have a look
Yes.
inside. So it's a bit like, you know, these days people look through their photo albums.
Yes, exactly. This is by Edward Corbould. It is a depiction of a performance of King John in London in 1852.
And so this is what, full of images from plays that they'd been to together?
Yes, indeed.
So what else have we got? Let's have a look. This is fascinating.
So here we have
Una Noche in Sevilla. The Spanish dancers at the Haymarket Theatre, 1855. Look at that.
Occasionally, we know they actually travelled around with these albums, and we know from Queen Victoria's journal that they would spend quiet evenings together, turning through the pages and reminiscing.
Oh, about things they'd seen, places they'd been. What about these, then, these scenes here? This looks like Buckingham Palace, isn't it?
Yes, this is the garden front of Buckingham Palace in 1839, and it was #1 in Souvenir Album #1. So this was the first one to be included in the
it's a good
Souvenir
place to
Album.
start, isn't it?
Good place to
With
start.
your home.
Then here, to me, a very, very touching one, and it's the heart of what these Souvenir Albums were all about. This is the schoolroom where Albert and his elder brother had their lessons, the table on which they were dressed by their nurse, the piano that they used to play, and Victoria in her journal in 1845 describes the holes in the walls, which were the result of their fencing lessons, which took place in the same room.
Fantastic. And what have we got under here?
This is Manchester.
Wow, industrial Manchester.
Yes. Shortly after their visit to Manchester in the late 1850s. I mean, you can feel the pollution in the sky, these huge chimneys, and then the spires of the churches in the background, but seen rather idyllically from the rural foreground.
Victoria and Albert's art reflected their life and their love. But it wasn't an entirely equal partnership. Albert loved Victoria, certainly, but Victoria adored Albert. And like any couple, there were tensions. Albert avoided his wife if she was in a temper, preferring to have it out with her in writing.
You have again lost your self-control quite unnecessarily. I did not begin the conversation, but you have followed me about and continued it from room to room. I do my duty towards you, even though it means life is embittered by scenes, in inverted commas.
Their ever-growing family placed an additional strain on their relationship, giving birth to 9 children in 15 years. An exhausted Victoria found herself having to allow Albert to take the lead.
It's mainly her pregnancies that slow her down. She realizes this relationship can only survive if one of them gives in, and she's the one who gives in. In many ways, he breaks her will. And you can see that in the letters he writes to her when they are courting. He writes, "Beloved Victoria," and a few years later he writes, when they have been married for a while, "My dear child."
Albert valued self-control and liked to be in control of others, something that did not endear him to many around him.
Albert had few friends at court or anywhere else. He could be ungracious in society, arrogant, humourless, and he didn't flirt. Albert, said the Queen, is seldom much pleased with ladies or princesses.
Albert was very driven. I mean, he was a Victorian before you invented the word Victorian. He was into self-betterment. He was into religion. He wanted to do something with his life. He wanted to help. He wanted to work for a greater good. That's why he took on Victoria. I mean, she was a project in many ways to him. And he believed in educating himself all his life. I mean, he had so many interests. He was in that way a Renaissance prince.
The pinnacle of Albert's achievements came 10 years into their marriage. To celebrate the progress of Victorian Britain, a great exhibition was to be held in London's Hyde Park. It would be, said Albert, a living picture of the point of development at which the whole of mankind has arrived.
Albert was in his element, tirelessly pushing through his plans for one of the greatest events Britain would ever see. A colossal building of steel and glass was constructed to house it. It would become known as the Crystal Palace. There were halls dedicated to art, science, and industry. As always, Albert and Victoria commissioned dozens of paintings to record Albert's vision of universal harmony.
Victoria believed that at last people would see the brilliant and creative Albert that she adored. "This is the greatest day in our history," she said. "Albert's name is immortalized."
Six million people went to see that exhibition in 1851. 6 million people, they get there for a start. Presumably, the railways were beginning to become more effective, but even so, it was truly remarkable and obviously had a major impact generally, so that people could see what was happening and what was available and where things were going and so on. But I think it was an incredibly bold venture.
Also on show were some of Victoria and Albert's own possessions, such as this extraordinary ivory throne. It's now being restored in the royal workshops.
It's a throne that was presented to Queen Victoria by someone called the Rajah of Travancore, and it was really the centrepiece of the Indian court of the Great Exhibition.
And what did she do with it?
She used it.
Oh, she actually sat on it?
Yep, she used it at Windsor in the audience room. We've got a number of images of her sitting in it. In 1855, so a bit after the Great Exhibition, she received the ambassadors of Siam, who had to crawl towards the throne on the carpet. She was sitting in this.
What, crawl on all fours?
Yes, that's out of tribute to the Queen. And she lost it. She went into uncontrolled fits of laughter.
Oh, poor chaps.
This must have been shaking.
And this is ivory, isn't it?
Yes, solid ivory. Ivory veneer, ivory plaques, and carved solid ivory.
There's these missing bits here.
Well, no, it's not missing. We've removed it so it can be cleaned and then reapplied.
Okay.
In a clean
And when
condition.
it comes to finding new ivory, which obviously is banned, you can't trade in ivory these days.
No, we
what
don't
do you
use
do?
we don't use new ivory. We use antique ivory, ivory from trophies and presents.
So you were just
It's
plundering other ivory.
Yes, we've had a lot of ivory in store from the hunting days of the Raj and of the royals. Here's a very old part of a tusk. This was the piece that was in the cheek of the elephant, and this is the other end. You can see the vessel that runs through the centre. And it's very, very heavy.
So clean it, obviously, that's it right there. Whoa! That's extraordinary.
Have two of those, and that's only half of it.
That is... I had no idea it was so heavy. So you'd get this, and then once you've cleaned it, actually I can see inside, because there's a...
It's
kind of
very
crack
yellow
here.
because there's no sunlight.
And then once you get below this yellow pattern, it's pure
It's
white again.
not pure white, it's ivory white.
Ivory, yeah, of course, yeah.
But it will bleach in time due to UV light.
And there's a little gap here. Is there's something missing here?
Yes, well, the whole centrepiece has been missing. We've made a mock-up of it to see how it looks.
Wow. So this...
This is actually ivory with a rope design around the centre and the jewel inset.
And then it just slots beautifully into
Yes,
here.
you can place it in.
Perfect.
When it's put together, it has green silk velvet cushions, and it looks altogether much sort of finer in its finished state, we hope.
As Albert approached his 40s, he seemed to be growing increasingly unhappy. The Great Exhibition had been his towering achievement, but it was soon forgotten. He was addicted to work, but neither the public nor the court had taken this foreign intellectual to their hearts.
They thought he was too clever. I don't know, maybe he didn't always take part in all the things that they expected him to take part in, I don't know. But it is, I can see it's quite difficult to come from another country and live in somebody else's. Perhaps they thought he was, yes, too clever by half, perhaps.
Basically, I mean, those last few years, he was practically dead with exhaustion with everything he took on. All the state papers, all the minutes, every time he interviewed somebody, made notes, everything was landed onto him. It was impossible.
Albert felt increasingly isolated. He had few British friends, and Victoria couldn't give him the intellectual companionship he needed. In a letter he sent home to Germany, he described his life as being like a donkey going round and round in circles to bring up water from a well.
Victoria began to worry. "My greatest of all anxieties," she said, "is that dearest Albert wears himself out by all he does." She was right to be concerned. In the winter of 1861, Albert complained of feeling ill. At Windsor Castle, he fell into a fever.
He realizes that he has something worse than a cold. And he knew that he couldn't talk with his wife about it because she was writing letters to her children saying, "Oh, Papa is moaning again, and I don't understand what's wrong with him." She loved him very much, but because she herself was such a robust person, she couldn't understand that her husband was totally burned out at such a young age.
On the 9th of December, the doctors diagnosed typhoid. 5 days later, Albert died. He was 42.
The Queen was devastated. Why hadn't he put up more of a struggle? She appeared to feel strangely let down by him. He seemed to care not to live, she said. He died for want of what they call pluck.
But he died so young, it obviously did completely and utterly destroy her life.
Albert never saw Victoria's last gift to him. The mausoleum in the grounds of Windsor Castle is in his favourite Italian Renaissance style. The effigy of Victoria was carved at the same time as Albert's, but it would be another 40 years before it was laid by his side. Victoria and Albert's love for each other had inspired their love of art. When Albert died, Victoria's passion for art died with him.
Royal marriages don't always touch the life of a nation. This one did. Albert and Victoria's 21 years together created a wealth of art that spoke of their love for each other, their need to create a happy family home, and their desire to chronicle it all for themselves and for posterity.
Scandal surrounds Emily and tongues are wagging in Lark Rise to Candleford, next here on BBC One. Well, over on BBC Two, a new adventure for Simon Reeve, starting a journey around the Tropic of Cancer